everyone, this is Stephanie Seiner. I'm a school garden educator with Erie's Public Schools, and I also run Wildfield Urban Farm in the east side of Erie. Today we are going to talk about kale. So first off, what is kale? Kale's a leafy green. It's grown to eat its leaves and stem. It's a member of the cruciferous or brassica family, so kale is related to broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, radish. Very nutritious and healthy plants. Now, kale has recently become more popular, but it's been around for a long time and there's a lot of different varieties of it. So we're going to talk about what kinds of kale there are, how you grow kale, how you prepare kale, and what it's like to eat. So first off, we'll talk about our seeds. There's a lot of different types of kale. And if you get a seed catalog, if you go online to a seed company, you can find different kinds in their descriptions and decide what type you'd like to try to grow. I'm going to talk about a couple of the kinds that I really like, but every year I try a different kind. Okay, we're back. We're talking about our varieties of kale that you can start with. There's a lot of good seed companies. You can get seeds online, you can get seeds through the catalog, or you can go to your local garden center or store and find the types of seeds that you want. Some companies that I've had really good success with are High Mowing Seeds, Seed Savers Exchange, Johnny's Selected Seeds, and Baker Creek Seeds. Some common varieties of kale that are grown are the red Russian kale. It has a purple stem and a nice smooth leaf and really good flavor. The Dinosaur or lacinato kale. This is my personal favorite kale. It has a really good flavor and a really fun bumpy leaf. It's also the favorite type of many pests I've noticed, so that's the trade-off. This is a type of kale I've started growing more recently. It's an early Hanover kale, and it's done really well for me. It comes up really fast and it has great flavor. This kale here, the dwarf blue curled, is a Siberian kale. It does really well in cool weather. So if you're growing your kale in hopes of having it last into November, December, and maybe even over winter for you, picking one like this is really good. But most of the kales can handle cold weather, and if you cover them during the winter, you can get a harvest for a long time. How do you plant kale? So first you need your seeds, which we just talked about. Kale seeds are very, very small. Now, when you're planting kale, you can start it inside and transplant or direct seed. I prefer to start mine in a tray and let it grow for about 4 to 6 weeks before planting it outside. And the reason I do this is because there are a lot of pests that like to eat kale, from rodents to insects to caterpillars. And if you start out in the ground with a large, healthy plant, it's better able to withstand the pressure of pests than if you start the small plant right in the ground. But I have had some success with just putting the seed in the ground, letting them grow, and dealing with things as they come along. So it's your choice of how you want to start it. If you do transplant your kale, you will need a tray or some kind of container. If you're doing a lot of kale, you can get a big tray like this. If you're doing just 1 or 2 plants, you can recycle any kind of small container, a food container, a small pot, whatever you want. So you'll put some potting soil in your container and then check your seed packet for instructions of how deep to plant the seed. This one says seed depth, put it 1/4 inch in, and the ideal temperature for germination is between 70 and 80 degrees. That'll have your seed sprouting in just a few days, usually about 5 or 6 days it takes to sprout. Now, as your seedlings grow in the tray, you'll just need to make sure that you're keeping them watered. If you plant a lot of seeds in one hole, you'll need to thin them out so that you just have one plant in your container or in the cell of your tray. When your plant has 3 leaves on it, usually at about 4 or 5 weeks old, then it's time to put it in the ground. If this is your first time starting seeds, reading everything on the back of the seed packet will really help you out, because this explains what requirements your soil needs to have, how to plant your plant, what it needs to grow, and usually other tips that might help you if you're growing this for the first time. Most seed packets will also tell you how long it will be until harvest. Now that can vary depending on the temperature, depending on how much shade your plant gets, how much water it gets, but it gives you a rough idea of when you know you can go out and harvest your first kale. This type here says 60 days. So if you plant your seed, you transplant it at 4 weeks, you can probably start harvesting kale just a few weeks after that. And you can continue to harvest throughout the summer. So we're gonna go out to the garden and look at how to harvest the kale and some of the different types of kale that you can grow. Here we're going to harvest some winter boar kale. This is a curly Siberian type kale. I got the seed from Johnny's. I planted it as a seed in mid-March. I transplanted this plant to the garden in early May. And I've picked a few leaves from it so far, but I've mostly been letting it grow to get bigger leaves. So when you come to harvest kale, you can bring some snips or scissors, or you can just use your hand. But you look for a nice leaf that has a dark green color. I generally don't pick leaves that are yellow or have any brown on them. And you just take off the leaf. Now at this time of year, I usually check the leaf for caterpillars, aphids, other little bugs. And this one looks pretty good. So I'm gonna pick a couple more, and you can just go in and snip off a leaf. The important thing is to leave the center of the plant so that it can continue to grow. One thing that you'll run into with growing kale is dealing with pests. There are a lot of things that like to eat these delicious leaves, especially some varieties over others. So you can play around with growing different types and seeing what you prefer for flavor and what you have to deal with more insects. I grow these organically, so I don't use pesticides or any sprays. What I generally do when first planting the plants is use row cover, which is a lightweight fabric that you put over your plants that will help prevent pests from landing on them. If you can get your plant to a nice size leaf, it's more resistant to pests and you're more likely to be able to harvest it if it reaches maturity before it starts getting eaten. A very common pest of kale and other cabbages, broccolis, and cauliflowers is the cabbage worm. There's a white moth that comes, lays an egg on the back of the leaf, and as they hatch, there's a green caterpillar that's exactly the color of the leaf that crawls up and eats. So you can see a few holes in this leaf. If you notice those holes on your plant, then that's a very good clue that you have the cabbage worm. I just go through and pick them off. So I flip the leaf over, I look for little green worms, pick them off. Now, there are other issues that can happen, like what's going on with this leaf. I don't see any caterpillars on this leaf, but all of my dinosaur kale looks like this, and I think it might be a bird. Just a guess, but there's something coming in and ripping this leaf apart. I still eat these. If you're selling your kale, your customers might not want something that's this kind of bitten up, but it's fine to eat. Just wash it off. Now we're going to talk about how to prepare kale, a couple different ways. First way, if you want to eat your kale raw, kale salad is very popular, very easy to make. First step, wash your kale. I like to dunk it and let it sit in some ice water for a while, just in case there's any little bugs in there. They'll come off. Rinse it, wash it. The first step after you've washed it is to strip the leaves from the central rib. This is edible, but it's very tough, and I eat it if I'm cooking the kale. I usually don't eat it if I'm making a raw salad. You can save these. You can put them in compost, but you can save them using them to make stock. You can also pickle them, which we're not going to talk about today, but if you look it up online, pickled stems of kale or chard, there's a lot of cool information about that. So once you've separated the leaves, I tear them up by hand until they fit in a fist like this. Then I just chop them up. You want nice small pieces because kale is a lot tougher of a leaf than lettuce, and it can be a bit to chew if it's in large pieces. So once your kale is nice and chopped, stick it in a bowl. This is the part of the video where you will speed it up. And it'll be okay. So you got a bowl of kale. Next you take a little bit of sea salt, just a pinch, maybe half a teaspoon or so depending on how much you have. And I like to put in a splash of lemon juice or apple cider vinegar, just something that's a little sour and acidic. Brings out the kale flavor. Okay. And now you spend about 1 minute just massaging the salt into the kale. This is very fun to do with children. And as you massage, you'll feel the kale starting to wilt and it'll shrink down in size. Okay, and you can see the kale is shrinking. It even becomes a darker green color as the moisture comes out of the cell walls of the plant. And once you feel it become more tender, it's ready to eat. My favorite way to make kale salad is to toss this with a little bit of garlic and tahini, which is sesame seed paste, and another splash of lemon juice and black pepper. You can also add apples, dried cranberries, dried cherries, or you can do a little bit of cayenne pepper with the lemon and make it a spicy kale salad. It's totally up to you. You can put whatever you like to put in a regular salad, or you can add this kale to a regular salad. You can do just about anything with it. An easy everyday way to prepare kale is just a simple saute with onions and garlic. This works especially well if you have some leaves that have a couple brownish spots, have some bug holes, something that you might want to not put in your fresh salad. For this, you can use the stem and the leaves. So I start out with the stem. I just chop it up really fine. Have my skillet on the stove, put a little olive oil in it, and you add the stems. You also mince some onions and garlic. It's really awesome if you have these from your garden or from a local market. So you have your onions, your garlic, your kale stems, and then once the kale stems and the onions start to become translucent, it's time to put in your leaves. I chop them the same way as the kale salad. You don't have to measure. You don't have to see how many inches it is. Just chop it up, toss it in. Now at this point, I put a lid on the skillet so that the kale can steam in there for a little bit. I check on it after 2 or 3 minutes, and if the kale has turned bright green and has wilted down, then it's ready to go. I turn off the heat. I add a little bit of salt, pepper, maybe tahini, maybe some coconut milk, sesame oil. You can do almost anything and it will taste good. It's really good served on some rice or just as a side dish to whatever you're eating. That's a simple way how to saute kale. You really cannot mess it up. If you're not ready to eat your kale right away after harvest, you can store it for up to a week in the fridge if you prepare it the right way. So once it's harvested, get it out of the sun right away. If you're able to bring it inside and rinse it in the cold water, let it soak in some ice water for a little bit. That will really help it stay nice and crisp. So once the leaves are not looking wilty like this, the ice water will help bring them up to be crisp again. I like to put them in a reusable plastic bag in the fridge, wrap them up. You can wrap them in a wet paper towel, just something to keep the leaves protected so that they don't dry out in your fridge. Store them in the produce drawer and they'll be good for a few days to a week. If you're running out of room in your fridge, which happens to me when I'm harvesting all the produce, I also store the kale like I would store cut flowers. So I cut the stems, I stick them in a big jar of water, as cool water as you have, and then every day change the water, cut the stem a little bit more, and they'll keep this way. If your kitchen's not hot, they'll keep this way for at least 3 or 4 days, and that'll save you some fridge space if you need to store your kale on the counter. You want some kale? you go. Wow, he's chewing a long time. He loves it.